We understand an upside-down world, but they're writing us off before we get to the starting line. A stalled generation? Who do you think is gonna fix all this? We will, because our future is the future. So we're going to build bridges and hospitals in a day, and feed those left in the cold. We're going to do all this and more, because we have an appointment with destiny.
I want to switch gears over to football just a brief amount. The new divisions dropped, and there's some changes. I think there's some winners and some losers in all of this, but there's also been some rumors kind of around whether or not there would be some additional news coming out. So take this all with a grain of salt that this podcast may be outdated eventually at some point. But Bodie, I'm curious, are you confident enough to at least talk about these divisions somewhat, that this is going to be the rough semblance of what this is going to look like next year? Or do you think that there will be radical change from what has been published?
Yeah, I don't think I'd be shocked if there were a ton of change, because it seems like every year, whatever method is decided on, that there is always voice going against it. Although the only thing I'll say is there's clearly enough voice in favor to it every year that it gets decided to, hey, let's go with this method, whatever it is. So as much of the, I don't want to say outrage, but as much as people seem to say, oh, how did we pick up that method? Well, it always happens at the end of the year. It's like, how about you say it at the beginning of the year before any of that stuff's decided? But yeah, I mean, the divisions are out. They've been out, I think a week ago today. I've checked through them a couple times. The normal stuff, you have 4 teams from Division 2 moving up, Granite Hills being the one that made the biggest jump there. But yeah, I also,
Ramona, Mira Mesa, San Marcos all move up to Division 1. East Lake, Rancho Bernardo, Scripps Ranch, and Steel Canyon all move down to Division 2.
Yeah, I looking at those, it doesn't, it's not a huge surprise just looking how those teams did, because that's how it's all weighted, and whatever you did most recently is obviously the biggest in that formula.
To me, Bishops is the most insane one. When you see Bishop pop up in Division 2, that's just pure. I mean, we had this discussion at one of the finals last year about them actually getting more per pound than most other fighters in these weight classes, like you were saying. But it seems that we talk every so often about D5 needing a enrollment cap or perhaps something like that to buffer it. It seems like Bishops has stopped being a fun anecdote and is now a runaway train that needs to be stopped for their own safety type. Like, this is not sustainable to have Bishops playing D2 when they have, I feel like, consistently said we don't have the ability to play 10 really hyper competitive high level games, because that will physically take too big of a toll on our roster.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just looking at how the teams were, it's not that Bishops was so good in Division 3, because they weren't in the final last year even, for them to move up, as much as the teams that moved from D2 to D3 just had years that were very out of character for them. I mean, Grossmont moving down, I mean, Grossmont has been in the open division before. So for them to be down in Division 3 now, San Diego takes that jump down, and they're in the bottom half of Division 3 based on these. So it's unfortunate, because it seems like it punishes Bishops, where it's not like they had the Tyler Buckner year where they face El Camino in the final. And it's kind of what you're saying. It doesn't seem really fair, and almost like they should be protected for their own safety there, because we know what their roster always looks like. It's rarely over 25 kids. I mean, that might even be high there. So I'm sure they're frustrated, but at the end of the day, I always make sure I give credit to their staff for seeming like they get the most out of what they have. But there comes a point where Division 2 is really good football, and looking at the other teams that it looks like they're going to be facing, there's a lot of big public schools. I mean, think back 10 years, you have Oceanside and Bishops here separated by 1 spot. That's just crazy. So I hope for their sake that they don't go against each other in a possible playoff game, because we just know bigger roster, bigger kids, it's just how it is. And it's unfortunate that Bishops kind of falls this way. But like we've also said, maybe this isn't even the method that ends up happening next year. It could be decided, and wouldn't shock me at this point. You know, there's been a lot of talk and interest in going in a separate direction. So we'll see. Maybe that's the case.
It makes me wonder if maybe the way that the 1,000 number is thrown out for an enrollment size cap on D5 that maybe sub 750 or something like that, you have to apply to go up from D3 or something like that. Because I know that, Madison and Modern Day are both under 1,000. Madison's maybe at 800 something, so maybe they wouldn't qualify exactly. But like, to me, there feels like a threshold where you can knowingly say, okay, great, yeah, like this is going to be a sustained part of our culture, building a football program, and it's nothing wrong or right about that. It's just something that you commit resources to. Bishops has consistently shown that they want to have a good football program, but it is not something that they prioritize enrollment over. If I have it correct, that like the Palomalu kids couldn't even get in, and you would think that like that would be something that you'd be like, oh, the no-brainer. Like, we're just going to have that around our football program. So yeah, maybe whatever that number is, you have to kind of apply knowingly, like sign a consent waiver to go up to that size of it. Looking down into Division III, I think it's crazy to see Fallbrook Fallbrook does move up, but to see Palo Verde Valley and Mission Bay move up again, it's kind of like you said, it's a weird one where some of these are almost that schools are having good years, but that other divisions are having historically consistently, like Oceanside can move down. Ramona can move down and down, or not Ramona, Rancho Bernardo, like some of these bigger schools can go and slip really fast all of a sudden because they bottom out against this top tier Division I open division type, season.
Vista's another one here as I'm looking. They moved down from Division II and they're already at the bottom of Division III. So it's like that's one another. They're in danger of dropping to D4 already. So it's just, I think it's much more how historically bad some of these programs had of a season, of 2 seasons, of even 3 seasons, because that's weighted as well, than it is that these other teams are kind of getting punished for having solid years, but still getting moved up when probably they're not ready for it.
Well, so to me, Palo Verde and Mission Bay are both going to be really interesting case studies because they have moved at parallel speeds up from D5, facing off in that finals 2 years ago, to now being in D3 together. And graduation will hit Palo Verde a little bit more completely and in totality this year than Mission Bay, because they had a clash. Osborne graduate and then was replaced last year. There was still a quarterback. Like they still maintained good. They played good football. They made a deep playoff run. But both of these schools similarly are kind of the one graduating class seemed to have propelled this upwards. And so you can kind of market both and be like, how does a school handle graduation and this? Will have actually at the same time 2 independent points of data that you can track very easily. And I think that Fallbrook, I looking up here, seeing Fallbrook in italics over Palo Verde. It's messing me up. But I think Palo Verde, if they maintain that running style, I'm not saying that you can find a Marcus Macon at every grade, but if they run all the time and they know what they're doing and they have the scheme and the momentum, maybe they can find a good couple of replacement backs over the next few years and maintain at Division III, have a little bit of success. Coaching staff at Mission Bay has done a great job over the last couple of years. But then again, do they one more time slide up into D2? And then does it get way out of it? Like, it'll be really interesting to see how this works, or if we've reached a point where some of this is just so broken that you need to start talking about structurally really going back and reordering it. In D4, you have Orange Glen as one of the teams that's sliding down. That was, I want to say, as high as D2 recently with Cale Patterson and all of that generation. That makes Classical and Orange Glen now a Division IV rivalry game, which is kind of fun. You love seeing those kind of ones line up. Crawford moving up, I think, is interesting because they will be hit hard with graduation and need to replace some bigger pieces after having kind of been the anointed D5 team, but falling up short. They need to avoid kind of getting caught up in the wash. In this D4, D5 exchange, El Cajon Valley now kind of becomes the de facto D5 team to consider anointed. I know that Kyle Gordon has graduated, but the El Cajon has become a harder and harder out the last couple of years. And I guess you also look at sort of Vincent Memorial and San Ysidro as being a couple of the other programs that have made some of those up and up changes. But between D4 and D5, is there any winners and losers that you're really focused on, Bodie, before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think Army Navy is a winner that I look at in Division 5 because they were very successful, ultimately didn't make that run as far as they would have hoped to this year, but the teams that kind of gave them trouble did make that leap. So with Army Navy still young enough guys on that roster, these next 2 years, they have the shot to go win one, and then ultimately, probably if they do, make the jump up from there when they may not be ready for it. But I think they kind of are in a good spot now where they can go up, and maybe it's them in El Cajon Valley in the title next year, because we know Escondido Charter, Classical both made that jump up. And who was it? Mar Vista was another team that gave Army Navy trouble there. So I think for them, that's the team I'm kind of looking at that benefits from this. But also another one, Valhalla, a team that several years ago, I think Valhalla may have even made an open division back in the early running of it. For them to now be sitting down in Division 5 is a huge surprise, but that's just kind of what it's become, and guys having transferred out and all
that. Don't want to make light of a school going from open to 5 this quickly, but you can sort of almost track the moment that it happened. If I remember correctly, Valhalla closed out the 2016 season against Helix the last week of the season, and that dropped them into 8 to then play the Carson Baker team again for the opening division of the open playoffs. And
you're right. I just pulled it up there. Yeah. 2016 Cathedral beat Helix in the final, but Mission Hills, Rancho Bernardo, Torrey Pines, Grossmont, Oceanside, Valhalla were all open division.
But the Helix beat Valhalla in the last game of the regular season to knock Valhalla down one more slot to again play them in the first round. And those cumulative losses were by like 100+ points. And that kind of like literally just, it hit them so far down that you just saw the stock just start dropping, like the FTT or FTX value in the last couple of months. And over the last 5 years, they've dropped really, really hard and are down there. But that's hypothetically how this system, I suppose, is set up to work. We're talking about, here's the case study. Is it worth it to see Vista drop from D1 to open? We could be in the middle of watching Vista drop 2 more divisions in 2 years down to D5. Like there's some of this that'll be very interesting to watch as, again, some new potential alternate methods are discussed. That is going to be it, though, for now, because everything past that would be hypothetical conjecture. We don't need to waste Bodie's time with that. Make sure you go download the SB Live Sports app or visit scorebooklive.com. Thank you also to our sponsors, the California Army National Guard. Please go check out everything that they are doing for you and your community. Bodie, thank you very much. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Yep, thanks.